The last thing my daughter-in-law said to me was something I never expected to hear. "You're not family, Margaret. You're free help. And free help doesn't get to make decisions in my house." Her words landed harder than the coffee mug she had just slammed onto the kitchen counter. My son Daniel stood 3 feet away. He heard every word. He saw my face. And he said nothing. I looked at him for several seconds, waiting for him to defend me. He didn't. So I picked up my purse. "All right," I said quietly. Rachel blinked. She had expected an argument. Maybe tears. Maybe the familiar apology I had given her so many times just to keep peace. Instead, I walked toward the front door. "Where are you going?" she demanded. "You told me I don't belong here." I turned the doorknob. "So I'm going home." Behind me, Daniel finally spoke. "Mom, don't make this bigger than it is." I looked back at my son. That sentence hurt more than Rachel's insult. Not because he was angry, because he wasn't. He was simply asking me to swallow another humiliation so his life could remain convenient. I walked out. No dramatic goodbye. No slam door. Just the quiet click of the lock behind me. For nearly 2 years, I had been the invisible system holding their household together. I picked up my granddaughter Sophie from preschool. I prepared dinners. I stocked their refrigerator. I handled appointments. I stayed overnight whenever Rachel traveled for work. When Daniel's construction projects kept him away for 12-hour days, I was the person who made sure his daughter ate, bathed, finished her homework, and went to bed feeling safe. Nobody had officially asked me to do all of it. That's how these things happen. One favor becomes another. Then suddenly, you're no longer helping. You're responsible. The argument that evening had started because Sophie had a fever. Rachel wanted to send her to preschool anyway because she had an important presentation. I told her I didn't think that was right. She stared at me. "You're always interfering." "I've raised children too." "This isn't your house." I nodded. "No, it isn't." She smiled bitterly. "Then remember that." So I did. I drove home through the rain to my small house on the edge of town. For the first time in 2 years, nobody was waiting for me to solve something. There were no lunchboxes to pack. No school forms, no grocery list, no text saying, "Can you pick Sophie up?" The silence felt strange. Then it felt peaceful. I changed into an old sweater, made myself soup, and sat at the kitchen table. My phone buzzed. "Daniel," I didn't answer. A minute later, another message appeared. "Mom, Rachel is upset. Can we talk?" I placed the phone face down. Then another message. "Who's getting Sophie tomorrow?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it told me everything. They weren't asking how I felt. They were asking who would replace me. At 6:40 the next morning, my phone started ringing. Daniel, then Rachel, then Daniel again. I watched the screen from my kitchen window while sunlight slowly filled the room. For years, I'd believed being needed was the same thing as being loved. That morning, I began learning the difference. And my family was about to learn it too. By 8 o'clock the next morning, Daniel had called me 6 times. I finally answered. "Mom, this isn't funny." "I know. Rachel has a presentation in 40 minutes. I have a site meeting across town. Sophie can't stay home alone." "I understand." "So can you come over?" "No." There was a long silence. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, I'm staying home." "Because of last night?" "No, Daniel, because you both made your position very clear." He exhaled sharply. "Mom, Rachel was angry. She told me I wasn't family. She didn't mean it. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't." I looked around my quiet kitchen. But I'm not spending another 2 years wondering which one it is. I ended the call. For years, I had trained myself to respond whenever my son needed something. That morning, I deliberately didn't. Instead, I made breakfast. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I made plans for myself. At 10 o'clock, I drove to a small community art center and signed up for a pottery class I'd postponed 3 times because someone always needed me. The instructor handed me a lump of clay. "First time?" I smiled. "First time I've had time." She laughed, not realizing how true the answer was. For the next 2 hours, my hands were covered in clay. I made something that looked more like a crooked bowl than anything useful. And I loved it. I didn't check my phone. I didn't think about lunch. I didn't wonder whether Sophie had her jacket. For the first time in years, I was doing something simply because I wanted to. Meanwhile, across town, reality was arriving at Daniel's house. Rachel couldn't leave for work. Daniel had to cancel his morning meeting. Sophie was crying because Nana wasn't there. By lunchtime, Rachel had missed her presentation. She blamed Daniel. Daniel blamed the childcare situation. Neither wanted to admit the obvious. Their system had depended on one person, me. That afternoon, Daniel sent me a message. "Mom, we need to figure something out." I didn't answer. An hour later, "Please." Then, "This is affecting everything." I stared at those words. For 2 years, my own schedule had been affected by everything. Their emergencies, their deadlines, their travel, their exhaustion, their plans. And whenever I had been tired, I told myself that family helped family. But apparently, family only counted when I was useful. The next morning, they tried replacing me. First came daycare. There was a waiting list. Then a temporary sitter. The sitter lasted 2 days. Then came a nanny agency. The price was far higher than either of them expected. But the real problem wasn't the money. It was control. Rachel had a 17-item list for anyone watching Sophie. The nanny was expected to prepare specific meals, fold children's clothes in a particular way, sanitize toys twice daily, organize school supplies, and keep the house guest-ready. The nanny quit. Daniel called me that evening. "You could at least help us until we figure this out. I already helped you for 2 years. You're her grandmother, and you're her father." Silence. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. "Sophie keeps asking why Nana doesn't love her anymore." I closed my eyes. That was the first time he had tried using my granddaughter against me. "Don't do that, Daniel." "I'm not doing anything. You are." My voice softened. I love Sophie. That's exactly why I won't teach her that people have to accept disrespect to prove they love you. He didn't respond. 3 weeks passed. I kept seeing Sophie on Saturdays. We went to the library. We made pancakes. We planted tomatoes in my backyard. I never discussed her parents with her. I never asked her to choose sides. And slowly, my relationship with my granddaughter became something beautiful. It wasn't based on errands. It wasn't based on fixing problems. It was simply ours. Then something unexpected happened. Rachel's boss moved one of her biggest accounts to another manager. She had missed deadlines. She had arrived late to meetings. Her work performance had changed dramatically. For the first time, Rachel was experiencing the consequences of a life that no longer had me quietly absorbing every inconvenience. Then, one Friday evening, my phone rang. Rachel. I stared at her name for several seconds before answering. "Margaret," she said. Her voice was different. No anger, no arrogance, just exhaustion. "We need to talk." I looked out at the garden I'd finally started tending again. "I agree. Can I come over?" I paused. "Yes. But we're not talking about childcare." "No." "Then what are we talking about?" I took a slow breath. "Respect." There was silence on the line. Then she quietly said, "I'll be there tomorrow." Rachel arrived the following afternoon with Daniel. I knew something was different the moment I opened the door. Rachel wasn't wearing the polished expression she usually carried into every room. Her hair was pulled back carelessly. There were dark circles beneath her eyes. And for once, she wasn't holding a phone in one hand while giving instructions with the other. "Can we come in?" Daniel asked. I stepped aside. They entered quietly. We sat across from each other in my living room. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, Rachel folded her hands in her lap. "I owe you an apology." I waited. She swallowed. "I shouldn't have spoken to you the way I did." "No," I said calmly. "You shouldn't have." Daniel shifted in his chair. Rachel looked down. "We've had a terrible few weeks." "I know. We've realized how much you were doing." I nodded. "That isn't what I needed you to realize." She looked confused. "What did you need?" "That I was doing it because I loved you." Her eyes lowered again. "And when you treated it like an obligation," I continued, "something changed." Daniel finally spoke. "Mom, we want you back." I shook my head. "No." Rachel looked up immediately. "We can pay you." "No." "We'll give you a schedule." "No." "We'll make sure you have your own room." "No." Daniel frowned. "Then what do you want?" I looked directly at my son. "For you to stop needing me in order to respect me." Nobody moved. The sentence seemed to sit between us. Daniel rubbed his hands together. "I should have defended you." "Yes." His eyes dropped. "I was afraid of making things worse." "You did make things worse." He nodded slowly. "I know." For the first time since that evening, I saw my son without the confident mask he wore everywhere else. He wasn't a successful professional. He wasn't a husband trying to keep everyone happy. He was simply my son. and he finally understood that saying nothing had still been a choice. Rachel's voice became quieter. Is there anything we can do? Yes. She looked at me. Respect the boundary. She nodded. I continued. I'll keep seeing Sophie. I'll take her for the occasional afternoon. I'll help when I genuinely want to. Rachel waited. But I will never again become the unpaid machinery that keeps your household running. She looked hurt. Then she nodded. I understand. I hope you do. Daniel leaned forward. Mom, we weren't trying to use you. I gave him a tired smile. I know. Then why does it feel like you're punishing us? Because you're experiencing what happens when the person who was carrying half your responsibilities stops carrying them. He went silent. I didn't say it cruelly. I didn't need to. The truth didn't require anger. Rachel stared at the floor. We thought you liked helping. I did. Then what changed? You stopped treating it like help. Her eyes lifted. I continued. When someone offers you a hand, you say thank you. You don't eventually assume the hand belongs to you. Rachel's expression changed. For the first time, I think she understood. I wasn't angry because they needed me. I was hurt because they had forgotten I was a person. Before they left, Daniel stood beside the door. Can I still call you if something happens? You can always call me. He looked relieved. But calling me doesn't mean I'll fix it. He nodded. I understand. After they left, I stood at the window and watched their car disappear down the street. I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I felt strangely sad. Because setting a boundary isn't always satisfying. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes you have to accept that the relationship you wanted may never look the way you imagined. But that evening, something inside me finally became clear. I didn't need to make them suffer. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need them to admit I had been right. I only needed to stop abandoning myself to keep everyone else comfortable. The next morning, I woke up early. I made coffee. Then I opened the notebook where I had been writing down all the things I'd postponed. Travel, pottery, gardening, friends, reading, things I had once considered luxuries. I looked at the list. Then I picked up my phone. For the first time in years, I started making plans for myself. And this time, I wasn't asking anyone for permission. The following months were uncomfortable, not disastrous, not dramatic, just difficult in the way real change usually is. Daniel and Rachel had to rebuild their routine without assuming I would automatically step in whenever something went wrong. They found a preschool closer to home. Daniel negotiated different hours at work so he could handle morning drop-offs. Rachel reduced some of her business travel. They hired a cleaner twice a month. And slowly, their household stopped depending on one person to absorb every inconvenience. Me. I noticed the difference the first time Rachel came to pick Sophie up from my house. She stood at the doorway while Sophie ran around the backyard looking for the strawberry plants we'd planted together. Rachel watched her daughter laughing. Then she looked at me. You've really changed your garden. I finally have time for it. She smiled faintly. I suppose you do. There was no sarcasm in her voice. That surprised me. I nodded toward the kitchen. Coffee? She hesitated. Sure. We sat at the small table where I'd spent so many mornings reading schedules, making grocery lists, and answering messages from her. This time there were no lists, no requests, just two women sitting across from each other. After a few minutes, Rachel said quietly, I didn't realize how much pressure I was putting on you. I didn't answer immediately. You didn't just put pressure on me, I said. You made me feel like I was failing at something I was doing for free. She looked down. I know. And I think I allowed it for too long. She looked surprised. Why? Because I wanted to be needed. That sentence was difficult to say, but it was true. I thought if I kept making everyone's life easier, I'd always have a place in it. Rachel's eyes softened. You never needed to earn your place. Maybe. I smiled. But I had to learn that myself. She nodded. Then she said something I never expected. I'm sorry I made you feel replaceable. I looked at her. You did. She took a breath. I was wrong. There was no dramatic music, no tears, no perfect movie-style reconciliation, just two people finally saying what should have been said months earlier. From the backyard, Sophie shouted, Nana! Look! I smiled. Rachel laughed softly. She's obsessed with those tomatoes. She planted them. She tells everyone. I stood up. Then she deserves the credit. That afternoon, after they left, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea. I thought about how different my life felt. A year ago, my calendar had been filled with their emergencies. Now it had things I had chosen. Pottery class on Tuesday, gardening on Wednesday, lunch with friends on Friday, Sophie on Saturday, and absolutely nothing on Sunday. That empty Sunday was my favorite. Then Daniel called. Mom? Yes? Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happier? I smiled. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Good. Then he said, I think I'm happier too. I frowned slightly. How? Because I finally stopped pretending everything was under control. I laughed. That sounds familiar. He laughed too. Then his voice became serious. I should have protected you that night. Yes? I've thought about it a lot. I know. I was afraid Rachel would be angry with me. And now? Now I realize I was more afraid of losing my marriage than losing your respect. That hurt, but I appreciated his honesty. And did you lose either one? No. He paused. I almost lost both. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a long time. My son was finally learning something I had taken decades to understand. Peace isn't created by avoiding every difficult conversation. Sometimes peace comes from finally having the conversation. That weekend, Daniel brought Sophie over. She ran through my front door carrying a small backpack. Nana, we brought something. I laughed. What? She pulled out a tiny flower pot. Mom, help me paint it. I looked toward Rachel. She smiled. The pot wasn't perfect. The paint was uneven. There were fingerprints everywhere. It was beautiful. I placed it on my windowsill, and for the first time, I realized something. My family hadn't become perfect. They had become honest, and that was better. I no longer measured my worth by how many problems I could solve. I no longer waited for someone to need me before I felt important. I had finally discovered that being loved and being useful were two completely different things, and I wasn't willing to confuse them again. It's been a year since Rachel told me to remember my place. Funny how one sentence can change a person's life. Today, I know exactly where my place is. It's in my own home. It's at my pottery wheel. It's in the garden I finally had time to grow. It's on weekend walks with Sophie. It's at the little cafe where my friends and I meet every Thursday. It's on airplanes when I decide I want to see somewhere new. And it's beside my son when he needs his mother, not when he needs someone to rescue him from the consequences of his choices. Daniel and I are closer now than we've been in years, not because I do more for him, because I do less. Our relationship finally has room to breathe. Rachel and I aren't best friends. I don't need us to be. But she respects me, and I respect her. That's enough. One Sunday afternoon, Rachel called me. Margaret, could you watch Sophie overnight? I checked my calendar. Yes, I'd love to. There was a pause. Then Rachel said something that made me smile. And if you're busy, it's okay. I leaned back in my chair. Those 6 words meant more than any expensive apology ever could. If I'm busy, I said, I'll tell you. I know. And you won't be upset? No. She laughed softly. We're learning. Yes, I said, we are. That evening, after they dropped Sophie off, I made hot chocolate for both of us. Sophie sat at the kitchen table telling me an elaborate story about a princess who refused to live in a castle because she wanted her own little house. I listened carefully. That's a very independent princess, I told her. She likes being free, Sophie said. I smiled. Smart girl. Later, after she fell asleep, I stood by the kitchen window. The house was quiet. My phone wasn't buzzing. Nobody needed me to solve anything. And I realized how much my definition of love had changed. For years, I'd believed love meant being available. Every hour, every day, every emergency. I thought saying no meant I was selfish. I thought setting boundaries meant I was abandoning people. I thought being needed meant being loved. I know better now. Love doesn't require you to disappear. The next morning, Daniel arrived to pick Sophie up. He stood on the porch while she hugged me. I'll see you next Saturday, Nana. I'll be waiting. She ran toward the car. Daniel stayed behind for a moment. Mom? Yes? Thank you. For what? For not giving up on us. I smiled. I didn't give up on you. He nodded. I know. I looked toward the driveway. I just stopped giving up on myself. He hugged me. A real hug. The kind I hadn't received from my son in years. Then he walked away. I watched their car disappear around the corner, and I thought about that rainy evening a year earlier. And Rachel had stood in her doorway and told me I wasn't family. She thought she was taking something from me. She wasn't. She accidentally gave me something I'd forgotten I owned. My time. My choices. my dignity, my life. I spent years proving my love by making everyone else's life easier. I finally learned that love doesn't require you to become invisible. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is step back, not to punish anyone, not to make them suffer, not to get revenge, but to let everyone become responsible for their own lives. Rachel once told me to remember my place. I did, and I discovered something she never expected. My place was never beneath them. It was beside them. And if they couldn't respect that, I was perfectly capable of standing alone, because I had finally learned the difference between being loved and being useful. And once you understand that difference, you become very difficult to control.